She has been all over the state making sure that people have the information that they need from law enforcement to citizens, to things that she's filed in the court. She is brilliant. She is fighting for us tirelessly every day behind the scenes. Catherine Henry is an attorney here in West Michigan. Let's give her an amazing American Patriot rally. USA! 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 USA!
Can you guys hear me now? I'm actually way too cold to start walking around right now, so I'm just going to stay put. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am actually moved to tears to see all of you here right now. So I'm going to try to get through what I want to tell you today, but it is amazing to see each and every one of you. So many people wonder why we're here today. Well, I'm here because I will not stand by idly while our governor, attorney general, and some of the law enforcement agencies around the state continue to break the law. I'm not advocating for civil disobedience. That's where you think the law is one that shouldn't be followed or enforced. I'm advocating for civil obedience because the law is very clear. None of the governor's executive orders have any legal authority after April 30th. Thus, I advocate for Michigan residents to exercise all of their rights, to open their businesses, to go in public without a mask if they choose, to participate in social functions without a social distancing requirement, like birthday parties, funerals, even AA meetings. I'm also advocating for people to have discussions with their local law enforcement, prosecuting attorneys, and public officials. Encourage them to follow the law as written, allowing people to exercise all of their constitutional and statutory rights without interference. All of the governor's 2020 executive orders have been based on her emergency powers. However, as we know, the state of emergency and state of disaster ended as a matter of law on April 30th. So while there are other legal provisions involved, the main point is that both the 1945 Emergency Powers of Governor Act and the 1976 Emergency Management Act must be read together as required by the statutes themselves and by the Michigan Supreme Court. And as required by MCL 30.403, legislative approval is needed in order to extend the governor's emergency powers. But the legislature did not choose to extend those powers beyond April 30th. Therefore, all of her executive orders lost their legal authority on April 30th. By attempting to continue exercising these emergency powers after that date, Governor Whitmer is breaking the law and violating constitutional provisions restraining her exercise of authority. Article 3, Section 2 of our state constitution prohibits the governor from exercising authority properly belonging to the legislature. Or in other words, she's not allowed to enact laws all on her own, which she's trying to do through these executive orders. The governor and Attorney General Nessel have told us that the governor is allowed to just terminate one state of emergency and keep reissuing a state of emergency as long as she wants to. But that's not allowed under either the 1945 Act or the 1976 Act. And as we all know, or at least we should, the governor or any government official cannot act unless they've been given the legal authority to do so. Besides which, many of these executive order provisions clearly violate rights guaranteed to us in both the Michigan and United States constitutions. MCL 30.421, one of the statutes of the Emergency Management Act, requires executive orders and other emergency actions by the government to be done, quote, consistent with the provisions of the state constitution of 1963 and the federal constitution. Additionally, the same statute prohibits prosecutors from prosecuting any violations of these executive orders in any, quote, manner that violates any constitutional provision. Prosecutors are further prohibited in the prosecution of violations of these executive orders from prosecuting, quote, conduct presumptively protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. This is not a carve-out for individual behaviors. No. This is a stern reminder to prosecutors of the restraints placed upon the government in regulating us, the people. Even in the most heightened state of alert our state could ever experience. Attorney General Nessel blames legislator commentary for creating confusion among law enforcement officials tasked with enforcing these orders. She claims the governor's orders have legality based on their reasonableness. Well, it's not reasonable to issue executive orders like they're going out of style. And last I looked, when I left this morning, it was 92 executive orders in about 2 months' time. It's not reasonable to treat statutory emergencies like a mere term of art instead of the actual urgent situations these emergency powers were meant to address. It's not reasonable for a governor to exercise powers properly belonging to the legislature, especially for longer than the statute actually allows. It's not reasonable to interpret the new Emergency Management Act to allow a governor to circumvent the 28-day time limit by simply issuing new orders that address the same circumstances and same emergency conditions of the original order. It's not reasonable to think that this particular governor gets to unilaterally extend the state of emergency or disaster on her own when none of the 87 prior such declarations by prior governors were extended without the legislature. It's not reasonable for executive orders to be issued based on selective compliance with statutory provisions, cherry picking. It's not reasonable to assume that the legislature enacted the entire Emergency Management Act simply to defer to the whole Emergency Powers of Governor Act. It's not reasonable to issue emergency orders and terminations like a light switch being turned on and off. And it's not reasonable to issue or enforce executive orders that infringe upon our constitutional rights, especially when those rights are explicitly preserved in the language of the statute itself. Nor is it reasonable to enforce executive orders explicitly focused on, according to the Attorney General, quote, keeping people away from each other, when those same people are guaranteed the right to assemble, collectively worship, express their speech, and petition the government. All executive orders issued by Whitmer in 2020 are based on these emergency powers, and as we just discussed, all of those powers came to an immediate end on April 30th. Without such emergency powers, all of those executive orders became unenforceable as a matter of law. I've been taking this for granted that it was obvious to me once the emergency was over, that meant all of the other orders were gone. But hundreds of people still email, call me, text me, Facebook me every day asking, well, what about this executive order? What about the one with masks? What about the one where I can't see this person or can't do that? Every single one of these orders lost its legal authority on April 30th. All individuals are therefore allowed to travel, assemble, worship, conduct business, go to places of public accommodation, and exercise all of our rights without any attempt by law enforcement, prosecuting attorneys, or places of public accommodation to infringe upon those rights. And all attorneys, law enforcement officers, and public officials took an oath to uphold the U.S. and Michigan constitutions and faithfully support the laws of the state of Michigan. Therefore, any such person who attempts to enforce these executive orders now is directly violating their oath of office, acting outside of the scope of their governmental authority, and engaging in malicious prosecution and abuse of process. As I've shared this with literally every prosecuting attorney and law enforcement agency across the state of Michigan in the last couple of weeks, a few attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, have actually reached back out to me and said things like, well, this is only an opinion, and these statements are threats against us, and only a judge's opinion matters. Well, the very words of our statutes and of our U.S. and Michigan constitutions are not opinions. And this is only a threat to those who are attempting to violate our rights in the Constitution. And it is a threat, but let's be clear about this point. Governor Whitmer, the media, and even now Hillary Clinton have been quick to mischaracterize our words and our actions. But we are not here to advocate for violence. Prosecuting attorneys, law enforcement, and government officials who break the law and violate the Constitution by enforcing these defunct executive orders should feel threatened. But they should feel threatened for losing a job, receiving disciplinary action, being removed from public office, being personally sued for acting outside of the scope of their governmental authority, and being criminally prosecuted for their actions. But they should not be physically threatened, they should not have their homes threatened, and they should not have their families threatened. After all, we have the law on our side, and we do not need to resort to illegal tactics to win this fight. I am proud to call West Michigan home, and we have a lot of Christian people in these communities here. And some of these very people have reached out to me and asked how they can stand against the governor when the Bible tells them they have to follow their government. So anyone who is wondering that right now, I want you to listen to this. Romans 13 requires you to submit yourself, quote, to the governing authorities. So what is the governing authority? Governing authorities look different in every country across the globe. But here, our government derives its powers from the consent of the governed, as emphasized in the Declaration of Independence. And here, authority is the right to act legally on someone else's behalf. Well, governments have authority for conduct that is authorized in either a constitutional provision or a statute. Our governor derives her authority from the enumerated powers of Article 5 in our state constitution. Our constitution expressly prohibits her from creating laws, that'd be Article 3, Section 2, let alone in executive orders that cover more than one subject, that'd be Article 4, Section 24, or that modify parts of laws without including the entire text of the law as amended, Article 4, Section 25. Our state constitution requires the governor to wait 90 days before enforcing new laws or legally enforceable executive orders. That would be Article 4, Section 27. Article 4, Section 39 of our state constitution, get this, requires our state and local governmental operations to continue in periods of emergency. Wow! Did she read the Constitution, I wonder? Article 11, Section 1 of our state constitution requires all public officers, legislators, judges, law enforcement, school board members, and yes, even the governor, to support the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution. So, the governor, police officers, and anyone else trying to enforce these orders are, in many ways, acting outside of the scope of their governmental authority. Well, back to the Bible, Romans 13:7 tells us to give everyone what you owe him. We do not owe it to her to follow her instead of the Constitution. And since we, the people, established both our state and federal constitutions, we owe it to each other to follow them, the constitutions. But let us not forget Isaiah 1:17, which tells us to seek justice and rebuke the oppressor when dealing with a rebellious government. And Ezekiel 11, verses 1 through 4 tells us that when, quote, leaders of the people are giving wicked advice to those they govern, God calls us to speak out against them, to speak the right words at the right time in the right way. We all know that the governor has several lawsuits already filed against her for these illegal executive orders. Well, you can wait for a court to sort it all out if you want to. I won't. I did not get my rights from a court. I got them from Almighty God. Our U.S. Constitution was written to, quote, secure those blessings of liberty. It says so right in our preamble to our U.S. Constitution. And here, quote, we the people of the state of Michigan, grateful to Almighty God for the blessings of freedom and earnestly desiring to secure these blessings undiminished to ourselves and our posterity, end quote, established our state constitution of 1963. These liberties are to be exercised by all people unabridged and undiminished by the very text of the constitutions themselves, during times of emergency or not. So I am going to follow the law. I'm going to follow the Michigan Constitution. And I'm going to follow the U.S. Constitution and exercise my rights now without having to wait for permission to do so. And I urge you to do the same. And for anyone who wants all these boring constitutional provisions that I mentioned today, I will have the speech up at stopcovidchaos.com, hopefully by tomorrow morning. Thank you all.
Who runs the state? The people! Who runs the state? The people! Who runs the state? The people!
That's right, everybody. Who runs the state? Oh, that's right. That's Gretchen Whitmer. Did she think that was going to happen? That statement was going to go in this situation? I don't think she thought that, did she?